Welcome to Flakemiri, a show about Gwent. I'm Flake. I'm joined by Shinmiri. This is episode 2, Shinmiri.
Hey, Flake. It's great to be back to episode 2 of Flakemiri's podcast. Yeah, we are. This is a show about Gwent, and we always dive into much more and explore all the tasty tangents along the way. So if you guys have any questions, make sure you tweet at us or post on our Reddit post, stuff like that.
Yeah, there's different ways to get at us. I mean, between your Twitter, my Twitter, Reddit, the comments on these, wherever this podcast is, that's where you can reach us. We are going to have a mailbag segment eventually at the end of the show. We do got some stuff we want to talk about, rather. I mean, today's episode is brought to you by, nothing, because there's no sponsor at the moment, Shinmiri. This is where you and I sort of show our beautiful faces and say, like, these are the kinds of good people that maybe you out there are listening want to sponsor our show, but we can pretend. So for today, Shinmiri, I'll say that today's show is brought to you by Aratuza's tutoring program, where you can teach an old spear new tips. That was a bad joke.
Wait, what? Okay.
I know.
Yeah, and you know, speaking of bad jokes, we'll start things off with the official Dagon rumor report. What you got there, Flake?
Well, today's Dagon rumor report. Still no Dagon. Still not happening. Not yet, at least. It's just not happening.
Oh man! All right. No more Dagon. No more Dagon.
no more Dagon talk. I know. I just kind of. It's not a show if I don't just kind of weasel it in there. But also, let's just blast back a little bit here. Gwent's been around for a little while. Shinmiri, you and I have been playing it for quite some time. Did you know that this week in Gwent in 2018, CDPR launched their homecoming stream, where Burza and Slama both dove into the updated ranking systems and the progression system, what we now kind of exist in, like the MMR system and from 25 to pro rank, etc. That was kind of released and exposed to the world in 2018 on this week, and it was quite the double dip. This was also the week where the gameplay trailer for Thronebreaker was released. It was pretty impactful as a week. Gwent 3 years ago. If I gotta say, this was a pretty big week 3 years ago.
Yeah, I can't believe it's been that long. It's been 3 years since Homecoming, almost 3 years since Homecoming and Thronebreaker came out. And I mean, what a long way we've come. I think the game is evolved quite a lot since then, and for the better, I'd say.
Oh, definitely. I mean, this is a kind of a point of discussion that a lot of people have, and I see a lot of people discuss this and toss it out there. The most prominent way for people to express their distaste for Homecoming is usually as a comment on a YouTube video or a tweet or something where somebody's like, bring back old Gwent, bring back beta Gwent. But I honestly don't think that beta Gwent is better than current Gwent. I think you can agree with that. Yeah, I don't think so either, man.
It had its own flair. There's, it's not like necessarily apples and oranges, or yes, it's more like apples and oranges. It's hard to compare them. I definitely enjoyed both versions of Gwent, but I think in the longer term, this Homecoming is a much more long-term sustainable format and game.
Well, yeah. I mean, and what's funny is, like, this is not even the topic that we wanted to get into this, but I think it's worth just kind of exploring just a little bit. 3 row, people are like, well, if there's 2 rows and there's row limits and this and that, frankly, it just kind of increased the skill ceiling to a degree where playing around stuff and keeping in mind the amount of real estate you have on a board to deploy things, it actually makes sense and it matters more. If there's one thing that became a little bit over the top with old school Gwent was the fact that eventually rows just kind of didn't matter. Row locked units no longer were row locked in. Like, everything had, like, here's an old school term for all of you kids out there. Do you remember when agility was a thing?
Oh my God. I've forgotten that word existed. That's a keyword that states a card can be played on more than one row, right?
That's it. And it was typically like a Scoia'tael kind of thing, where Scoia'tael had a lot of agile units where they can just be played on any row and have their effect, where prior to this, a lot of the cards were just like flat out row locked. So all the cards as you see them today, where there's a deploy effect that occurs only on a melee row or on the back row, these are you could still play the card anywhere, but old school Gwent was such that you were just kind of locked into playing it on a particular row, which
I never understood what the complaints about like, oh, we're going from 3 rows to 2 rows, the game is dead. You know, like I never understood the obsession with the fact that the game went from 3 rows to 2 rows. It's still the same game. I don't think it's really took away any sort of significant skill or flavor or soul of the game.
Because on the surface, Shinmiri, 2 is less than 3, so it's automatically in some people's brain a degradation, right? I'm a part of me is saying that as a joke, as just to make fun of the fact that, like, yeah, we can boil it down legitimately to that element. That the fact that, well, it's 2 rows and not 3, and 2 is significantly less than 3, and we've lost 33% of the quality of this game because of that. No, it's not it. And frankly, when you have 2 rows instead of 3, you can't hide away from your opponent's row effects or this or reach on certain units in that regard. So, when you're dropping weather on one unit, you no longer have 2 options to hide from it. You only have 1. So if you're stacking a row, you might get punished. It kind of plays into that regard. So I honestly, like you, believe that the removal of a particular row, in that case, I guess it was was it the range row? Yeah, because it used to be melee, ranged, and siege rows. Yeah. So the range was the middle row. The removal of that middle row has really increased, I guess, a certain amounts of skill ceiling to the game, as well as the row limits. I think that is incredibly important because you and I have casted, so many matches, and how many times, Shinmiri, has that row that row limit come into play to dictate or to sort of determine when someone either passes or when someone plays a card or whatever. That the management of that has been integral to someone being a good player and elevating their game to elite. It's those kinds of things. I think that Homecoming has accentuated and kind of departed from when the 3-row no limit kind of game that it used to be.
Yeah, and the row limit probably spawned from a necessity of trying to translate the game over to mobile platforms with limited screen real estate. But I think it does end up increasing the skill ceiling and introducing another aspect for players to consider. And I think that's a good thing. Like, definitely, it's an additional aspect to kind of juggle and master. Make sure that you don't end up overswarming your own board, or like, maybe you need to control the lengths of the different rounds because of your Nilfgaard opponent's going to fill your board with spies and stuff like that, right? Oh,
100%. 100%. And that's one of the things that we want to get into in this episode is also when Shinmiri and I are discussing kind of, what's the meat next to the potatoes of what this podcast is all about. And we decided that, there are certain decks out there that have spawned as being unique in their own way. And Shinmiri and I, we've seen thousands upon thousands of games played. We've played thousands upon thousands of games. And what we have essentially decided is that there are certain decks out there that within the framework of what Gwent is in terms of rule sets, win 2 rounds, have more points than your opponent 2 out of the 3 times, and you win the game. There are certain decks that just feel different.
Yes, there are certain decks that I guess you coined the term, they have some more personality than the standard decks. You've got your standard decks that have like normal, mundane win conditions, which just like, we're going to play for card advantage. Maybe the standard is like, on red coin, we can play some garbage, three cards, throwaways, play some carryover and then pass. Another really typical strategy is just like, you're trying to lock in maybe 1 card advantage or not lose on even, these sort of things. And then you're trying to remove some of your opponent's threats, play some of your own, play some points land, play some engines, play some control. And then at the end of the day, you just kind of like compare points and see who has more points. And then there's like this whole other league of more unique, more outrageous decks that do crazy things that make you really ask yourself, what just happened?
Yeah. There are decks out there that essentially take the standard playbook and throw it out the window. Decks where you're thinking, like you said, there's this, I don't want to call it paint by numbers way to play the game, but a lot of the times it's like, all right, the least amount that I can commit in earlier rounds that will guarantee me or secure a win for this round. Means that I have bigger assets to commit in rounds that matter, in round 2 or round 3, whatever my strategy is. But generally speaking, it all kind of comes to the same thing, because shooting from the hip and just dropping these massive bombs and like hit after hit after hit after hit, it seems unorthodox. And that's kind of where you and I decided, you know what, there are some decks, like I said, that have some personality out there, and one of them that you tossed out to me first is probably one of my most hated decks of all time.
I think I know which one it is.
Well, I mean, you could go ahead and say it. You are the Skelligan Ambassador.
Does it rhyme with hippie?
It does, in fact, rhyme with hippie, though the mellowness of this deck might be in question, because it does certainly evoke some anger within me. The maelstrom of emotion within my core being always gets a little bit turbulent when that name is there. But yeah, Lippy is one of them.
Yeah, and Lippy is kind of a deck that kind of bends the rules of the game a little bit, right? Like you said, normally in a standard decks, you're trying to conserve your resources, not blow your load too early in round 1 with like slamming all your high provision golds. You want to save some of that stuff for later rounds, for usually the determining round 3 after each player has won one round. But Lippy kind of flips that on the head and says, okay, I'm just going to throw all my best cards at you in round 1, and then at some point I'm going to play Lippy, which shuffles all the cards that are in my graveyard with the cards that are in my deck. Like they reverse them, they swap the cards from your graveyard and your deck. So the cards that you invested already in round 1 that went to your graveyard already now become what you draw into for the rest of the game. Yeah, and you get to potentially play those huge bombs twice.
Exactly, which is something that you don't necessarily have to you don't have access to those kinds of resources twice. Typically, cards you play typically go to the graveyard, and unless you're playing a very graveyard centric some type of reanimation list that brings things back from the graveyard, puts them back on the board. If that's your whole meat and potatoes of this entire picnic, well, that's fine. That's one way to do it. But this just takes that to a whole different level. That is certainly one of them, because again, it really turns what your standard thought process is kind of on its head, because usually in a lot of these cases, Shinmiri, when you're playing the game, I find that oftentimes you're not looking to sprint ahead as far as you can in certain rounds, at least for the most part, because value passing is a thing. That's definitely what you want to do. But with decks like this, they don't care, because they're basically pedal to the metal as much as possible, at least for Lippy, in round 1 to get so far ahead that it's almost obscene for your opponent to continue. And if they do, you punish them. But like it talks about like the deck is basically super top heavy. But again, doing it twice to the degree where it almost feels like you're cheating, you know?
Yeah. And I think that sort of stuff like that, actually, for me, I know you don't like Lippy decks specifically, but to me, it does kind of make the game interesting, because you have to think on your toes and think about, okay, this is, not a standard game of Gwent. I have to think, how does this deck exactly work? What are its strengths and weaknesses, and how do I exploit those things? So with Lippy as an example, one thing you can potentially do, there's a couple of options, right? If you tried to trade blow for blow with your good cards to trade with their good cards in round 1, you're probably going to end up losing, because they're going to play those high-end cards twice, and you are only going to get to play your high-end cards once. So what you could potentially do is you could try, and this might not be necessarily the best strategy, but you could try something like, okay, I don't want to trade my good cards against your good cards. Let's just give up round 1 and pass, and not let you get that much value from playing all your good cards twice. Because if I pass round 1, then you're only getting to play a couple of good cards twice and not all of your good cards twice, right? Another strategy could be, okay, maybe I'm running such a good long round strategy, and Lippy is known for not having a long round strategy. They have a short round strategy with their Ceres replaying all their Shield Maidens. Well, maybe my deck has such a better long round than your deck, even enough to like kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like,
what you can
bulldoze through
right.
your control tools, even in the long round, then what I can do is I can fight really hard for round 1, right? Fight really hard for round 1. If I end up winning the round, I can go to a long round 3 where you're going to end up being at a disadvantage because my deck actually has a cohesive long round strategy. It doesn't. So these sort of like on the spot adaptive strategies that force you to think on your feet, I really like stuff like that.
I think that they're great for the game. As much as I, rag on the fact that Lippy is just like this thorn in my side, it is a rock in my shoe, and I despise it. I think that decks that kind of operate this way as I find that something like that, though, it's just the problem I feel with Lippy specifically is the fact that it operates in a very linear fashion where it's basically, all right, I don't care what my opponent is doing for the most part. I only care when they pass, and I'm going to be dropping the same bundle of points, based on what I've drawn. And my whole objective here is basically secure this round, and then in the short round, Lippy, tutor, go, and here's 40 some odd points that you have to deal with in a short amount of time. And I get it. And what I don't like about that versus other decks of personality, one that I want to propose to you right now, is that decks like Keltulis, for example, which is an incredibly deep personality-wise kind of deck. Like when you say a Kelly deck, you know exactly what is entailed in that package. When you say Lippy, you know what's entailed. You've got like this image in your mind that's already painted, this beautiful mosaic of, all right, you say Lippy, I know what's happening. You see the board state in your head. You see the cards happening. You see the short round burst, etc. When you say Lippy, it's kind of like when you say Keltulis, rather, it's the same thing. It's a Kelly deck. Well, shoot, I know that it's going to be really, really head-scratching to figure this out because that is one nasty card to come out here. And what's interesting is that the focal points of these personality-style decks are not even like finishers. Because if you say, I'm playing Spell Gourd or something, that Gourd's kind of a finisher card that comes out in that degree. But cards like Lippy and Keltulis, these are cards that are kind of facilitators to an overarching strategy. They're kind of engine pieces. Like Lippy's a reload, whereas Keltulis is this ominous threat. It's not a finisher. It's kind of like a win condition, but that's not where your points are coming, right? Like that's why I like Keltulis so much more than Lippy.
Yeah, and I think Keltulis is a great example. It certainly is a win condition, but it makes the gameplay very unique in the fact that it's one of the only cards that makes players care about their relative number of units that are on the board. So it incentivizes really unintuitive plays that we've seen on the highest levels of competitive Gwent, such as like Pyable using his Gutting Slash to kill his own unit against Colomon's Keltulis in a huge tournament to win the game. Like you never really think about, oh, maybe I should Gutting Slash and destroy my own unit. But that was the winning line in a game for thousands of dollars at the highest levels of Gwent, to kill your own unit so that the opponent's Keltulis is the only unit on their board, and then you just threaten to discard your cards for a few turns, and the Keltulis is killing herself every turn if your opponent doesn't play a smaller unit to block.
Exactly, and we've seen similar styles of kind of this I don't want to call it stagnation, but the decision tree that you have to take is like, okay, like I could play something, but that's detrimental, and that goes on both sides. Same thing for the Keltulis player as well. It's not like what we've seen in the past, you and I, in previous, for instance, like Gwent Open number 3, where you had like Precision Strike. Those were like hyper control lists where you and I joke around. Okay, the discard over under set at 3.5. How many are there going to be? Like over 3.5, under 3.5, and there's these situations where it's like the first person to blink. Eventually, you have to put some bodies on the board, and they're probably going to just get absolutely wiped out. But with this Keltulis, there's this situation where I remember I was playing with Keltulis a couple of weeks ago, and I had just absolutely dominated round 1. Same thing in round 2, and I had a 2-card advantage. Round 3 was I had my Keltulis out again with Witch's Sabbath, and there was a situation actually where after my opponent played their last card, I needed to, if I played any other card, just even like if I wanted to be a dick, if I wanted to just rub it in and just BM and play my cards because I was in such a commanding lead, I would have lost. I needed to pass with those 2 cards because as soon as I started playing them, it would have burnt down points on my side and I would never have been able to recover.
Yeah, and the card that you play is worth fewer points than the card that Keltullus actually would have burned had it gone back to their turn, right?
Precisely. And that is kind of why I feel like Keltullus to me is a better representation of what this, like these outside the box, these game changing style cards and decks, these personality decks are, because it forces more strange decision making for your opponent. It kind of warps what everybody's perception of how a game should go, right? Because you're never thinking to kill your own unit. You're never thinking of discarding a card because you think that it's just never in your interest to just give up tempo like that, to give up your initiative like that in that regard. And I mean, when it comes to personality decks, there are so many more that are popping up because of these fantastic designs that come through. Again, I hate Lippy with a passion. I despise it. It is a boon on society. But cards like Keltullus just pull that whole genre of personality decks, of uniqueness, into the stratosphere of fascination that I just can't not admire.
Yeah, I think some of my favorite moments from the history of Gwent have been unintuitive moments, unintuitive plays, like you said, hitting your own unit with your spell, maybe boosting your opponent's unit. You remember in beta when Villain Trettenmirth was a popular card.
Oh man, are you talking about the Super JJ move?
Yeah, Super JJ, Swallow Potion on his opponent's unit so that his opponent's Villain Trettenmirth would scorch himself instead of Super JJ. Like stuff like that I feel like it's really, really cool. It makes you feel very satisfied when you find that unintuitive line of play that actually ends up winning you the game, being the winning line.
Right. And I feel like decks like this typically are better spotlights for the creativity that players can show in order to get up that to that extra echelon. And one thing that I always tell players, it's like, everybody talks about how, card games are just games of luck and this and that, but in reality, they're not. Because if that was the case, then you wouldn't have the same faces just dominating the ladder all the time. There's skill that's involved. And we have seen how a lot of these high skill ceiling decks, they might sort of flounder on the ladder. They may not be the number one choice in a ladder situation, but we see them pop up in tournaments. Keltullus was like the flavor of the day in before sort of relics came around, because it was a nice control check for certain players, and it was a situation of you either have the answers for this deck or you don't, and you're going to be at my mercy. You're going to be under my thumb for 2 rounds with Keltullus just going crazy, and cards like the Witch of Sabbath now just making that twice as nasty. It's great to see. And this is one thing that I would always want to stress the developers at Gwent to just continue down the road. Create cards that are not just massive point generators. Create cards that warp and change the way players have to play the game to win. And that's not just from the perspective of the player who plays that special card, but on the other side as well. Because Keltullus, when that card came out, it was almost like people are like, why would I play this? It seems so kind of, it's row locked. Yeah. It can get locked. It can get this. And then people figured it out, and they created such a tight deck that just has withstood the test of time since it has been printed.
Yeah, it's been one of the longest lasting archetypes to remain somewhat relevant that I can think of for out of a lot of decks that have been in the history of Gwent. And I think it's a really tough challenge for game developers or card game developers to balance the idea of, yes, interesting, unique mechanics that force you to do weird things and cool things, but also not to the point where it breaks the game. These sort of really fun, unique cards, they're also the easiest to make the game feel unwinnable or like nothing you can do. Those type of feelings from their opponent. So examples like Lippy, I loved playing Lippy, especially when it was off meta before it became popular, right? You remember, Colgrim. Colgrim is another really good example of these unique decks that, for example, Colgrim decks can go down multiple card disadvantage on purpose in round 1, even after your opponent's passed, to go down card disadvantage so that they can activate their low adrenaline Colgrim earlier in round 2 and hide it behind a defender, maybe copy the Colgrim with Letho Kingslayer. I had so much fun playing that deck when it first came out in Way of the Witcher. It's like one of my favorite clips on my stream of all time. I had like -6 card advantage, and I just watched the two Colgrims grow up by like 12 per turn, and I had like 120 point Colgrims at the end of the game, and my opponent just futilely trying to catch up. Every card they played was worth like 10 points, but I would gain like 24 from my Colgrims, and it was just hilarious. But
which is fascinating.
Those are fun for a while, right? But then if you keep playing against it and you can't figure out a way to defeat the deck, it can get very annoying from the other side.
It is, and like that is a great example again of one of these meta warping style cards that create situations that opponents might not necessarily be prepared for. Like you said, I'm going to go down cards, and what's the reason? Well, it's not just to secure the win, but now I'm playing with less cards, and if you have no answer to this Colgrim, I am on adrenaline now for not just 2 turns, because last save means dick to me. I am on adrenaline for 6 turns, and it's like I'm going to drop it, and if you cannot pick up on this whole rigmarole that I'm throwing out there, if you do not catch the wind of this, then you're in for a surprise, because every card if you think that just this is it, like 24 points, that 10-point card is actually worth -14 points. You could just pass and make this a lot less painful for you. Mm-hmm. I'm hoping that there are more cards like this that come out. I'm curious to know what you think. What is the most recent card that would be like that? Like, I feel like something like Witch's Sabbath could be kind of to that degree. It's almost like a Lippy Light for monsters, because it has like a niche. Because a card like Lippy, it forces, same thing with Caltulis, it forces the entire deck design to support what that card wants to do. It's not a win condition in itself, because all the supporting cards are what you're going to win you the game, but it's enough of a benefit to your game plan. It's basically the heart and soul of what you're trying to do, and you need to support it. It's like any sports team. Like I'm going to use a hockey team, for example, the Montreal Canadiens, whom I adore and love, and I'm a season ticket holder for. They have or had, he's injured right now, but Carey Price is like a world-class goaltender, and they've basically designed their entire setup to support that one massive piece, and they have found success from relative moving forward with that. But that said, that's kind of like what these cards are. You see a card like Caltulis, you see a card like Lippy, and you're like, I see the potential in this, but everything else I have to do, the remaining 159 provisions have to be for this.
Yeah, I think like Witch's Sabbath is definitely an example of that. I think another recent example would be something like Meditating Mage, which we know has caused quite a ruckus in the Gwent community over the past, with its cheap resilience and plethora of ways for Northern Realms to copy it. And yeah, that's another example of a deck that kind of breaks the standard mold of how you're supposed to play the game. Another deck that is happy to go multiple cards down in round 1 if your opponent passes early. But yeah, there are some cool strategies in beating that as well. Like I detailed in one of my Reddit posts last week, using a cool mechanic like a hero pass is really interesting. And the fact that the deck promotes or incentivizes players to find these cool niche interactions. For those of you who don't know what a hero pass is, it's where you are so far ahead of your opponent that you can pass before they pass the round and still win the round. So like that can be a hero pass can be utilized very well against a strategy like Meditating Mage.
So
that's really cool.
A true hero pass, in my opinion, and you could probably come back on me on this one. A true hero pass to me is when you've lost round 1 and you pass in round 2 while your opponent still has cards to play.
Yeah.
That to me is the true hero pass, where you're like, okay, I got 2 cards left. You've got 1. I don't think you have enough to come back at me, but if I'm wrong, then I lose the game. That's the hero pass.
Yes, yes, that is definitely the origin. That's where most players originally see the use of a hero pass is, yeah, when you've already lost round one and you're like on match point, or so you can say, right? Like your opponent's on match
Right.
point if they win one more round, but you just like, you just say, all right, I think you're bluffing. I don't think you have enough points to actually tie my score here. I'm just gonna pass without even seeing your last card. But yeah, you can kind of translate that idea into round one as well.
Oh, for sure. That's you need two things. Number two, you need the lead, and number one, you need the lead, and number two, you need balls of steel. Like that's what you got. You got to have some chutzpah to do it because it's not for the faint of heart. I found because I have taken some pretty nasty hero passes in my career in round two where I've been like, yeah, you don't have it. You take the pass and you're like, oh yeah, you did.
Okay,
Not only
okay,
did you got me. You caught me red-handed.
What's the most embarrassing is when you give a speech, you're streaming and you give a speech and you're like, okay, I'm definitely going to take the hero pass. There's no way he's even close. And then after you hero pass, they actually beat you by like double digits.
It's like, oh, it was like barely. It was one of those things where you're like, okay, you're taking that inventory, right? You're like, okay, I've seen this.
Yeah.
What's the worst it can be? It could be if it's a heat wave, I'm safe. If it's this, I'm safe. If it's this, it's this, it's this, it's this, it's this. There's nothing that they could do, and suddenly they just like pull out a scorch or like just a vanilla like, spear tip or something. You're like, what the hell? And you're like, all right, give my regards to your balls because that was just absolutely brilliant. Like, congratulations.
Yeah, that's what I love about the hero pass too. It takes not just balls of steel and a lead, but also a good read on your opponent and understanding your opponent's strategy and deck and what they're likely to play and what they're likely to still have left. It takes a lot of skill.
I'm going to put a call out there to everybody who's watching or listening to this. If you have clips of your own hero passes, send them to me. The failures and the successes, we want to see those for sure. I think that would be a really cool segment on the show. Is just like the weekly hero pass of the or the hero pass of the week or something like that. But speaking of reaching out to everybody out there, we have opened the mailbag. So just after this quick break, Shinmiri and I will be back to open the mailbag and answer all your questions, or a good part of them that you guys have sent to us over the past week. Okay, it's letter time, ladies and gentlemen. No snail mail here. It's all been done through Reddit or Twitter. You guys can message us on Discord as well. Either way, if you guys want to get in touch with us, if you guys have a question that you have for either Shinmiri or myself, just ask us. We're going to dig into them on the show over here every week. We like to hear what you guys have to say. Shinmiri, do you want to get first dibs on this one, or do you want me to go first?
All right, I can go first.
All right, hit it.
All right, first question from a random guy 482852 on Reddit. Does Shinmiri rope as much when playing off stream, or is the roping mainly because he is explaining his thinking process to chat on stream? Great question from random guy. I definitely rope as well when I play off stream, but not as much. So they're definitely right about like part of the roping coming from explaining my thought process and interacting with chat and answering questions. But I think if you want to play well and you want to improve at Gwent, one of the best things you can do is actually take your time and rope. And I say rope with no negative connotation whatsoever. I think it's actually perfectly fine to use the time allotted to you as long as you're using the time for something constructive and not just trying to purposely waste your opponent's time, right? And I think even after you've decided on what you're going to play this turn, you can definitely do a lot with the time that you have remaining. You can think about, okay, what am I going to do for the next turn or the rest of the round? What's my plan for the rest of the round or even future rounds? What do I expect my opponent to respond with after the play that I just made? And does that change what I actually want to do right now? Because a lot of times I know I do this. I've seen a lot of other Gwent players do this. They will have decided a play early on, but then after thinking through all this stuff, predicting what's still coming, realize that maybe there's a better play. Maybe there's an alternate line. And you wouldn't have seen that if you just slammed your card right away as soon as you saw a good play.
What I find is that, and we've discussed this on previous broadcast as well, is like a lot of the times it's like you see the play, it's just so obvious, and you're wondering why the pro or is taking their time to make the most obvious play. It's like, there's the scenario, you have the heat wave, why the hell would you even be sitting like considering this? It's just like it's an automatic point and click. That's why you have pack the card. It's there to counter this thing. But what a lot of people don't understand is that if this turn right now is so straightforward, the next one might not be it. So if you have your, I don't know how much time do you have per turn? I know.
I think it's 60 seconds.
Okay, if you would know because you go 59.9 every single time. So if you've got 60 seconds per turn, if it takes 3 seconds to make that turn, the next turn might need 90 seconds of actual time to sort of parse out. So you kind of investing every single ounce of time that you have to just parse out what the sequencing is for particular turns. Take the time that's allotted to you to pass it along. And I think that there is a negative connotation to, if anyone's going to turn this into a positive, it's going to be you, Shinmiri, Captain Wholesome in his entirety. But I will just say this. I mean, roping is should not be a negative thing. There are people who are out there who are assholes who purposely rope because they want to waste your time because that's what gives them their jollies. Sure, no problem. But for everyone else, roping is simply a way to make use of the resources given to you. Resources given to you being starting all the way in the deck builder with the provisions that are given to you. Then the cards you have, the points you have, the this, the that, the whatever. Part of the resources that are allotted to you is that clock, and people do not think about that because it does not necessarily factor into a point total, but that is a resource, friends, that you have at your disposal, and every edge you have, every edge that you're ever going to get in the competitive scene is how you utilize every single resource that you have at your disposal, clock included. So take heed of the rope master himself when he says that, yeah, even off stream he's roping because he's thinking about the future of that particular round and future turns. It's important, man. It's just I cannot stress it enough. I don't do it because I am very willy-nilly fire from the hip when it comes to Gwent. But for smarter players like yourself, do it. Just do it. All right. Question, Shinmiri. So it's coming from Molewitcher on Reddit. And Molewitcher asks, I feel like defenders are unhealthy for the game, and recent cards have heightened how unhealthy they are. How do you feel about defenders and their place in Gwent? You want to take a stab at this one first, or?
Sure. I think defenders have the potential to be unhealthy, and the strength of defenders and the healthiness of defenders, it definitely scales depending on what the biggest threat game are or in faction are. Because defenders are only as good as the biggest threat that they're actually defending, right? So if you get more cards like Kaltoas, for example, you get more cards like Witch's Sabbath or Brewer even. I think Brewer is actually one of the biggest threat cards in the game. He's just not trapped in an archetype that's not very good right now. But like, the more of those huge cards you print that are just like answer this or lose type cards, the less the more unhealthy defenders will become. And I think the devs recognize that, and that's why this past season or this last patch they buffed a bunch of purify cards, which is the natural counter to defender, and like stuff like Peller, for example, got buffed from 5 provision to 4 provision, and that's a step in the right direction in my opinion, but you would still have to draw your Purify or your answer in round 1. And I think that I don't know if we're quite there yet, that something drastic needs to be done. Maybe not yet. But I would like to see, not as many answer or lose on the spot type cards being printed. And maybe, I don't know if defenders need a rework. It would be kind of tough. Like some viewers have suggested to me, maybe defenders only defend their adjacent unit instead of the entire row.
Yeah.
So that they can defend only they can defend max 2 units instead of entire row. But then, you have to rebalance them a lot in terms of points.
I really, really like that rework for defenders. Another one would be that maybe just defenders are susceptible to locks. Like that could be it as well. I think that what you touched upon is true. I don't think that defenders as an actual card is necessarily the issue. I think it's what they're protecting that typically is. It's the fact that these defenders are creating an extra layer of answer answer situation, because a lot of these defenders are not just a 5 provision removal to deal with. A lot of these cards are not just a gutting slash away from being killed, or an Alzur's Thunder away from being killed. Usually they're Yen's Invocation and a Heat Wave, or something along those lines. It's a big ask to get rid of one of those. You could move it, but then your opponent's just going to play the card that they want to protect next to it anyways. What's the issue with these cards is not necessarily that they protect a row. It's that they create this like 2-factor authentication that you need to get to what your opponent is trying to present as a threat. So, and it's not like a catch-all. You can't just crowbar your way through it. For the most part, you need a specific key to get past it, which for most situations is a purify effect, right? So that in itself is difficult, because you're creating a situation of, all right, you probably have an answer for this threat, but do you have that specific thumbprint that you need to access that the lock, the padlock for what you can possibly bust through? No, there's that 2-factor authentication, and the first one is often the hardest because it's the most specific. It's purify or huge removal, and if that's the case, then you're likely not going to be able to get to everything else. Not to mention, oftentimes those cards are trading up. They're like 9 provision cards that trade up for 10 provision removals, like a Heat Wave or something big. If you've just been putting all the eggs in your Sheldon basket in order to drop down for massive damage, maybe that Sheldon can kill it, but that's not what it wants to kill, because then the threat still exists. So I think that defenders in general are not necessarily unhealthy. I think that they may need, like Shinmiri suggested, that his chat had maybe suggested, is like a little bit of a rework, that they're not necessarily these catch-alls that are like these umbrella effects for an entire row, because a lot of the things that they're protecting are not always row locked. So just moving that defender is not enough. Just locking, you can't lock the defender. You have to purify it and then find another answer. And purification of that unit is a 4-point low tempo play that is not really going to cut it for the most part.
I think you're really right you hit the nail on the head with like the fact that defenders need a very specific answer, and it would make it more healthy if you could answer them with a wider variety of things, like a lock, maybe like a movement, maybe like even some sort of damage or whatever. And yeah, like I think an example of a problematic card that tends to hide behind defenders a lot these days is like Idaran, for example, right? Like defenders often use to protect a card like Idaran that can just completely pop off and make so many copies of the same card, not even necessarily bronze, but so many copies of the same card over and over again. And you can get really degenerate strategies like Meditating Mage or what is it? Imperial Practitioner, which is probably a weaker version, but like stuff like that. And even in the Relics decks from 2 months ago with the Gurnikoras and the Mamunas and the Fruits and the Self-Eaters, maybe you just nerf cards like Idaran a little bit, and then defenders aren't really a problem.
I think, well, ultimately, I mean, again, it comes down to the fact that as long as they exist, it's going to be protecting a card that can be problematic. I think that any major sort of focal point card, like you said, you mentioned cards that are not row locked. You mentioned Idaran. I'm thinking of things like Full Test. I'm thinking of things like we mentioned him earlier. Nilfgaard card grows based on the discrepancy of your deck. Colgrim. Yeah, Colgrim. These are not row locked cards. So it's not just a matter of like, okay, your opponent plays the Cave Troll, you move it to the back because I want to lock or deal with your Keltulis that might come out after that. This is just, you can go ahead. You can move and ping pong my defender back and forth. I don't care, because I'm just going to drop that card behind it every single time. So yeah, who knows, man? It might be a situation where the defender itself, I like the idea of the defender, but I think that maybe it needs to get looked at in terms of finding answers. And I just want to touch upon something again. We like tangents here. When Purify came out, and same thing when Poison came out, there's a lot of these little extra elements that were introduced to Gwent over time, like Bleeding and Vitality, which came out with Crimson Curse, that faction. Then we had armor reintroduced. Then we had shield and this and that. One of them was poison. When poison came out, people laughed at poison. People thought poison was bad. Nobody wanted to take 2 turns to kill something. And then poison became super awesome. Wherein when poison was introduced and purify was introduced, people were like, these are both dumb. And now they're so integral, and they have really shaped, how certain decks are built, how certain decks function, and they have become to certain degrees identities of entire archetypes.
Yeah, I think the main reason poisons were kind of laughed at initially is just that there was not this critical mass of enough good poison cards to put into one deck. You can't play a deck with 2 poisons. It's just you're not going to be consistent enough in drawing your 2 poisons, and even if you do, if your opponent has 1 Purify or 1 Consume or something, then your poisons are missing the mark, right? You need at least 3 poisons in your deck to even think about putting poison.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. And last quick note about defenders is that the existence of defenders is kind of important for balance because it does serve a purpose. It keeps control decks potentially in check. Otherwise, if you just deleted defenders from the game, it would maybe upset the engine threat type decks, the balance between engine threat type decks and control decks, because you wouldn't have a way to kind of slow control down in its track.
Right. It might be just that oftentimes these defenders they're just a big FU to decks that just run the single heat wave to get rid of the single massive threat. Right. And that's a learning process. Dip your toe into the meta and see how it feels. Do you need a second removal card? Do you need that purify? And that's just all part of being a top tier player, is just being able to sort of fish that out. All right. Next questions to you, Shinmiri.
All right, what color would your lightsabers be? This question is from Ellis the Thunderbird on Reddit.
Okay. Well, I know what color mine would be. And now here's the thing. It's the fact that, I don't know if you knew this, but the actual colors of the lightsabers mean something. There is an actual, so green of the Jedi has to do with more so negotiation, mediation, strong in the Force. They're not warriors. They're more of mediators. They're more of negotiators, peacekeepers. Red, we know that. It's Sith and it's dark side. Blue is more warrior related, skilled with lightsaber, more combatant. They're more like knights and soldiers. Purple is more balance between dark and light, a strong overall in all aspects. And yellow is more. They're called sentinels, and the sentinels are kind of they're out there. They're more like espionage, more just go in, destroy the dark side kind of thing. I would say for myself, as the rogue cavalier type of person that I am, I feel like I would probably be more as the yellow lightsaber, the Jedi Sentinel lightsaber. That's kind of what I would be.
Nice, very unique. You don't see many yellow lightsabers out there, at least not in the main. Most
famously wielded by Jedi Master Plo Koon. Who is in the movies, is in the original, not the original, the prequels. Yeah, he's the dude. He's got the mouthpiece. You see him flying around. Plo Koon is pretty badass.
Okay.
You'll see him. So that's my answer. Now, I don't know if...
Now, for me, I'm not as big of a Star Wars nerd as you, but I did actually know some of that, at least I knew the concept that the colors actually mean something and are not just completely arbitrary. But my answer has nothing to do with Star Wars lore or what these colors mean. My lightsaber is obviously purple. I'm Skellige Ambassador. Skellige is my favorite faction. Gotta go with purple.
So does that make Mace Windu your favorite Jedi?
No.
But
Samuel L. Jackson's pretty badass.
Yeah, he is badass. Absolutely, he's badass. All right, that's for you, Ellis. Thanks for writing in. Last question for this episode is by Thnowman. I think that's kind of like a play on snowman. Thnowman on Reddit asks, what features or gameplay elements from other card games would you like to see incorporated into Gwent?
Should I go first on this?
If you want to. I know what I want, what I'm going to say, but I want to see if you want to go first. If not, I can definitely take the rails.
Sure. Okay. So as for other card games, I've played Hearthstone and I've played Magic the Gathering. They're not very similar to Gwent. Gwent is a very unique card game. So not everything from other card games would translate that would make much sense when translated to Gwent. But I think the thing that I would like the most that other card games may have, especially other digital card games, is like some sort of a replay system. Being able to go back to a game that you played in the past and just watch it step by step. You could like increment every move that you or your opponent makes, and basically kind of go through it and be able to analyze it and figure out where the game was won or lost, if you could have made any different decisions that would have benefited you. And I think that would be really useful for a lot of players in improving their own game. And the other. Yeah.
Oh, no. I was going to say one thing that Mythgard had as a game that I thought was incredible was the fact that you were able to go back and rewatch as it was played any game that you had played in the past month or season, and you could go watch anyone else's game that was recorded on Ladder. You can go and see like, oh, yesterday this person played this person. So you go click on it and it would replay the entire game, and you could fast forward. You can go twice speed, 3 times speed, 4 times speed, and you could watch the games occur as they were played in like real time. And it was a really great element. So I'm going to +1 on that one, but that's not the one I was saying, but I keep going because that was a really good one.
All right. I got another one, but if this is the same one that you want to say, then you take over. I don't want to step on your toes or anything.
Okay.
My other idea that I liked from other card games was in Hearthstone, there's like this history bar on the left, right? And Gwent has that as well, the history bar on the left. But I think Gwent's history bar could be more detailed and have more information there, especially when it comes to like when a player chooses to target something with a card's deploy effect or order, or even like a squirrel to banish something from your graveyard. Like right now, if squirrel banishes something from your graveyard and you weren't paying attention, there's actually no way for you to actually get that information of what it actually banished. So like just more information like that on the history bar would be very nice. It's a quality of life thing.
I have been caught in the past before where a squirrel comes down and eats something out of my graveyard, and myself as a Scoia'tael player, I look in there, I'm like, he didn't take my Onomancy, idiot. And then I drop my Forest Protector, and it's a brick, and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, okay. I have been had. I have been absolutely had. That's a good one as well. I do agree that the history bar needs a little bit more detail, and the fact that you had mentioned this on one of the Discords as well, and I got a +1 this again, is the fact that if you deploy a squirrel, there's got to be an animation, much like when like the Viper Witcher, the mill card, whatever, Kingslayer, whatever it's called these days. When that hits the board, it has that animation of like poof, it's gone, and you see it. If they did that with Squirrel, oh, the amount of headaches that would save me, and the amount of humiliation, because there was absolutely a shame concede after that occurred. Mine would be, I want to see, and I don't know how this is going to flesh out. So if you guys have ideas, send them in, but some kind of alternate win condition. And I understand that other card games have this. There's some sort of like, if you have all of these units on the board at the same time, at the end of your turn, you win the game, or at the start of your turn. Yeah, like that kind of thing. It exists in various different card games. In this card game, I'm trying to think of how that can work. If you had like some super high provision, really low power garbage units, and it's like if you end the round with these on the board, round 3, and these are on the board, you win the game despite the total. Like that could be fascinating. Like the way that you kind of have to set it up. Obviously, it'd be a nightmare to balance and figure out, but that's something that I would like to see tried, even if it was a separate format or a separate like seasonal or something to test it out. But it seems ridiculous, like how other card games within their rule set and the way that the games are designed can kind of support it. But Gwent is so unique, and I keep telling people like, oh, what's better, this or that game? Like, what's better, Gwent or Magic, Gwent or this? They're completely different animals. Yeah. You can't even equate them. They're both card games, yes, but the rule set, the framework, everything, the execution, completely different.
Like a 1 strength, 15 provision unit that says counter 4. If this counter gets to 0, you win the game or something like that.
Yeah, or like you had, what if there were 3 of those? 3 1 provision
One power.
1 power, 15 provision. Their game text reads, at the end of your turn, deal 5 damage to adjacent units. And you had to have like 3 of them on the board at the same time. Or it was like deal 10 damage to adjacent units. So you had to like play them, but at the end of the turn, if you don't have anything in between them to kind of like keep them alive, they'll kill each other. So, and they're worth nothing. Like that would be a fascinating way. Like how would you do that? You'd have to like put like meat shields in between them so that your opponent will know what's coming because they're going to have 3 of them. So really the onus is on the player to draw all 3, protect all 3, and let their opponent deal with it. Because you have 3 on the same row, they're just going to cannibalize each other, and it's
interesting to talk about nightmare to balance, like you said. Like our examples are probably pretty bad because like you could just kind of hide the fact that you're playing these cards, and then when your opponent passes, you just play all of them. Yeah. And then you really only have to win 1 round instead of 2, right?
Yeah.
I think a more realistic idea is actually kind of like Salamander. You ever seen those like double Salamander syndicate decks?
Yeah.
It's kind of like an alternate win condition, right? Poison everything on the board.
Right.
But you have like a veiled unit that survives.
Yeah. And I mean, if your opponent's playing Veiled, then it's a different story, right?
Yeah, but then you're also going to be playing some Purify to get rid of Veil or some sort of answer for potential Veil unit.
Yes. I'm just saying it's out there. It's a possibility. It's something that like kind of comes to me at night where I'm like, that would be kind of ridiculous. All right, we're gonna save it for a future episode, but for episode 3, Shinmiri, I'm gonna ask you, what would a card look like that just deployed that said draw a card, like stats, provisions, etc. I'd be curious.
Oh God,
we could
Silver
discuss
Spy
that.
flashbacks.
Oh yeah, but this one plays on your side of the board, so it's even funkier. But yeah, those would be some Silver Spy flashbacks. Great episode, Shinmiri. Again, this is episode 2 of hopefully 1,000, and we'll see. Who start our trek early. But yeah, man, I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, same. As always, pleasure to chat with you, all things Gwent, whether it's Gwent related or not. Always fun to have a chat. And you and I will see each other again later this week, won't we, Flake?
Oh, we will. Keep in mind, friends, that the Gwent Open number 4 is occurring this weekend. Again, we are recording this currently. It's the 19th of October. So you'll see this a little bit. We're coming at you from the past, but it's okay because in the future you will see us together again for Gwent Open number 4. Stay tuned for that. And again, if you have questions for Shinmiri and I, please, you can hit us up on Discord, Twitter, in our Gwent chat, in our Twitch chats, etc., all that other nonsense. Otherwise, just be well, everybody. Shinmiri, I love you, man. I'm going to end it on that way, as I usually do.
Yeah, I love you too, Flake. And we obviously love you guys, the viewers and the listeners. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you next